Welcome back to Champion News Talk Radio. We are brought to you by championnews.net. This is Carol Parisi. Today our founder, Jack Roeser, and myself have Mr. Tom Donelson with America's PAC, and America's PAC is doing some great things. And
Carol, we left off on something Martin Luther King said, and I want you to repeat it again against this background of the newspapers, as much as they talk about black people of importance, never gave emphasis to what Martin Luther King said. This is a seminal statement. It's right on the money for why people of all colors came, if white is a color, came to this country is for the American dream. Here's what Martin Luther King had to say.
Okay, it said, and so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
Isn't that great? Now, why doesn't the press ever emphasize that part of Martin Luther King, a man that earned his chops and is a big black hero? But
because it's easier to demonize the American dream, Jack, than to actually do the work that it requires to exemplify the dream, I think. I think it's a lot easier for Barack Obama, who has never run as much as of a lemonade stand. He's been on government assistance, and I just...
He never ran a business. All he was a community organizer.
Which, you know what, and it's on its face that organizing your community is a good thing to get better for your community. But when you're taking your community down a path not to prosperity, to slavery,
Well, the key element comes into play here is dependency. I mean, let me give an example here. One of the things that, to me, is when I see a country where you have food stamps go up about 16, 17 million, that's a failure. But where did we hear that word? This is failure.
It's rapidly increased. Sale of the giving away of food stamps is huge now.
But the left portrays this, oh, you greedy people. You don't want to help poor people. That is what the perception of the left is when you start talking these things. And I think for us as conservatives, it's more of a disparagement that our nation is faced with the crisis of all these people being on food stamps. Why are we not doing better for everyone?
Well, I think, quite frankly, is what's the old saying that goes to, if you give a man a fish, he'll be fed for a day. If you teach him how to fish, he'll have food, fish for life. And I think, let's go back to the minority community, because one of the problems, again, we look at it's like I call the invisible minorities. Well, when we did our survey, 14% of Hispanics own their own business. And this kind of coattails because we've done national surveys for the past 3 years, and what we found is very similar. We found anywhere between 10 to 12% of minorities own their own business. The Kauffman Foundation out of Kansas City, when they started looking at, entrepreneurship, they said in 2010, new business, 1 out of every 3 new businesses were started by either a Hispanic or an African-American. And majority of those were done by Hispanics. So basically, these are entrepreneurial people who are basically being cut off at the very start. I know, maybe a good way to put it this way, Jack, if you ran a business today with your story, you started with $5,000?
Yeah.
And today, could you translate that $5,000 into what you did today under these circumstances versus what you did 50 years ago?
Of course not. First of all, liberal governments since then have debauched the dollar. I can tell you that in the interval 50 years that since I first started the business, the dollar is worth about 14% of what it was at that time. 7 to 1 was the worth then compared to now. Gasoline was 38 cents a gallon. Translate that up to
$3
today,
at
it'd be
least more.
$2.50.
More. No, 3. It's probably it's almost $4
yeah,
right now, gas.
Well, it may be, but the difference in the currency alone would make it $2.50 or more. And of course, we're getting at least twice as much out of the thing. So really, there is no crisis in the cost of gasoline because the cost per mile is less than it was 50 years ago. funny fact. But it depends on what the press tells us we've got problems with. The press has emphasized the gasoline problem, as has the president has tried to make it more and more scarce and hard to buy.
Well, that's the thing. Maybe kind of a unique way of looking at it. I know Neil Cavuto of Fox kind of made an interesting observation. He said, when he was looking at all these numbers, he said, this is mediocrity. Are we at a point where we're accepting mediocrity? But I go back to some of these, again, let's go back to some of these minorities, many of these, in particular within the Hispanic community, they came for a start. They didn't come to be part of the welfare state, they come to be part of the opportunity state. And I think as conservatives, one of the things we try to emphasize American PAC is the opportunity state, the American dream. And what it takes, because here's the thing, as I stated, there are Hispanic businessmen out there, 14% own their own business. Many of them are mom and pop stores, but they're important in their own community. I can remember taking, my daughter lives in Brooklyn, going through Sunset Park, and you start walking, you start seeing these small businesses. They're minority owned. It's what's keeping that community alive.
Absolutely. In fact, because of that, we had opened, that is a Republican Renaissance PAC, had opened 2 offices in Chicago, something the Republican Party hasn't done in years. So what happened was that we found a big interest in the Spanish community, and we've started a newspaper called El Sueño Americano, which means the American dream. And our first issue of this publication, just 5,000 of them, it's caught on. The Spanish people grab that thing up. The grocers want to stuff it in the bag of groceries. It's becoming a way to advertise. It's brand new. We're only through our second edition of it, and it's coming out every 2 weeks and shortly be a weekly newspaper. But it's going to the Spanish community, and they are hugely interested in the American dream. And so the name Sueño Americano does mean American dream.
So America's PAC, what do? They message to the Hispanic and African-American community about the empowerment for the American dream versus the entitlement mentality?
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, many of the ads we have are based on free market conservative ideas. It's based on the idea, for example, lower taxes, the deficit. And for example, during our last election campaign, we talked about how the deficit is stealing from your children. We also talk about the fact that, for example, education. Many Hispanics, for example, are very much in favor of school choice because they want to escape these bad school systems.
95% of the African-American community,
It's just awful that the Democrats that are so dominant here in the state of Illinois have the worst stinking schools you can imagine.
You just
these
hit
schools
Jack's
are
hot
not
button.
good. Oh, yeah.
Schools.
Well, the bottom line is 40%. I mean, it was interesting to me. I'm looking at the statistics that they were presenting during the recent, what was it, your 3 or 4 day little vacation that they call a school strike.
Yeah.
And the thing is, they were saying, well, 40% of these students are not going to graduate.
That's right.
I mean, 40%. And not only that, but here's the kicker, 40% of the teachers don't even send their own kids to the school that they teach in.
That's right.
And when we do our ads, we make the case. It says, the same liberals who send their kids to private school are denying you the same choice that you have, that they already have.
That elitist mentality makes me crazy. Tom, what are the statistics, maybe you know them, of the African-American community and the Hispanic community that vote Democrat and versus Republican?
Well, in the state of Illinois in the last election cycle, about 20% of Hispanics voted for Mitt Romney and about 5% voted for, 5% of blacks voted for Mitt Romney. And usually on the average, if you look back from the election cycle, is that on a national basis, for example, in 2004, we got up to 44% Hispanic voters. And now we're down to 27%. And that's a kind of a dangerous thing. This is the reason why we do our program, because we feel to build the conservative majority, you have to start expanding it to those individuals within those communities who should be voting for us.
Well, they're intrinsically conservative. They're family values people. So we need to talk more about the disconnect. We're going to be going to break here in about 10 seconds. What's a quick thought you want to leave before we go to break?
Well, how about the fact that Bush did appeal to Hispanics a lot, when both Bush presidents?
Well, we are going to talk more after the break.